you. Oh, 1 second, sorry, I missed something up here. Here we go.
Should I keep my mask on while I'm talking?
You can take it off. I will just step out. So come on.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Am I on the screen now? I'm just going to assume that I am, and good. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Very sorry for the delay. I'll try to make up for it. So I'm going to talk for 15 minutes. It's 12:20, and then break for questions. And I think you can see the images on the screen. Is that correct? Everyone see a picture? Good, and the map. Okay. So as Kathy said, I'm talking about the research that has been sponsored by the Kelsey Museum and the University of Michigan since 2014 at the Greek city of Nubuterion in Western Turkey. So you see Nubuterion right here on the map. And if I can figure out how to advance on this computer, I will take you to the next slide. Oh dear. Let's try this again. Okay, can you see the pictures again? See the map and the slide? All right. And did we go to the next slide now? Aerial view with the sea. Thank you very much, Marina's iPad. You're a lifesaver here. So this is an aerial view of the site, which occupies 2 promontories projecting into the Aegean Sea on the west coast of Turkey. The city existed from at least about 500 BC, but it seems to have been moved to the site it now occupies in the 3rd century BC. At least the evidence that we have been able to collect via Archaeological Survey indicates that this site was not densely settled before the 3rd century, and that it experienced either a very radical program of urban development, or that it was moved from some other location to this site at this time. So it's, I'll show you a plan of it in a moment, but it's a grid plan town. It's surrounded by stout fortifications. It's about 35 hectares, which is close to 80 acres. That's twice the size of the central campus of the University of Michigan in area. And it features all the standard architectural accoutrement of a Greek city. So temples, theater, colonnaded public square, and next to that square, a council house or Bouleuterion, which was essentially the ancient town hall. So here is a map that shows Nubuterion in relation to other local sites. The name Nubuterion means southern place, and it apparently takes its name from its relationship to the town of Colophon, directly to the north, which was originally the center of habitation in the region, eventually supplanted by Nubuterion in the course of the last few centuries BC. So the research that we have been doing at Nubuterion consists of what we call archaeological survey, which is basically archaeology without digging. So it's mapping, it's collecting artifacts that we find on the surface, studying buildings. Did the screen go away? Okay, good. having a little difficulty advancing the slides here. Studying buildings and the local geology, basically the remains visible above the ground. This is an aerial view of the site. And here is a map made on the basis of about 5 years of research between 2014 and 2019. And as you can see from the map, it's a grid plan town, as I described it, surrounded by fortifications with, at the center of the city, a big public square. And here is an aerial view of that public square. And off to the upper right is the building that I have described as the Bouleuterion, the ancient town hall. And this is a closer view of it taken with a drone. So there had been some excavation at Nubuterion before we started working at the very beginning of the 20th century, and then very brief campaigns by Turkish colleagues carried out in the 1980s and 1990s. And in one season of research in the mid-1990s, our colleague Mustafa Büyükoğlu excavated a small part of this building, the Bouleuterion. And that's the upper part of the building right here in the picture, where I hope you can make out a bank of seats. So our job, without doing any more excavation, was by study of the remains exposed by Büyükoğlu to get as good an understanding of the building as we could. And we did that using new technology such as aerial photography and laser scanning, as you see here, as well as old technology, that is to say, people with measuring tapes and line levels and pencil and graph paper, making measured drawings of what they saw. And here is what we call the state plan of the building. And it is slightly oblong, so not quite square. The dimension, the north-south dimension, and the plan is oriented north-south, is a little over 30 meters, so very close to 100 feet, and that's not coincidental. Building is slightly less wide than that. And it consists of, so from the sort of inside out, a space in the middle, which was basically the stage. It is surrounded on 3 sides by tiers of seats which step up. And then there is a broad ambulatory on the outside. And the building is a split level structure that is cut into a slope. So on the left here is the level of the agora, the main civic and commercial meeting place of the city. And down here is a lower terrace, and the elevation difference is about 3 meters, so about 10 feet. So you enter the building at this point, and you can climb up the steps, the seats rather. There are stairways that go that lead you to the seat, so you can climb up the stairways to your seat, or you can enter the building at a higher level. And from the ambulatory, climb down the stairs to your seat. And the seating capacity of the building is about 500 persons. Okay, so I hope that gives you a basic sense of it. And I'm going to show you some drawings that will make it a little more comprehensible as we go on. Now, buildings like this are a standard part of the kind of urban furniture of a Greek town. So this particular building type, the Bouleuterion, achieved a kind of recognizable form by the 5th century BC, so 400s BC in Athens. So just as Greek religious buildings coalesce around a readily identifiable temple type, so Greek civic assembly buildings coalesce around a regularly identifiable building type in this case, in the 5th century. Most surviving Greek council buildings, however, date to a later period, to what we call the Hellenistic period. So that's after Alexander the Great, mainly to the 3rd, 2nd, 1st centuries BC. In general, they have a format similar to the one that we are seeing here at Notion. So they're oblong buildings close to square, with seats on 3 sides, and then a space at the base of the seats, which has the function of the orchestra of a Greek theater. So that's the place where speakers would stand when they were addressing town councilors assembled in the Bouleuterion. And as you see from this slide, which just gives you the dimensions of some comparable buildings, the Bouleuterion at Notion is quite large. It's larger even than the Bouleuteria at Athens. And I'm going to show you some of those other buildings for the sake of comparison, and also so that you'll get a better sense of what our building looked like. So this is a view that shows the so-called Nubuterion at Athens, and it's this structure here, and it's this structure here in the plan. This is different from the Bouleuterion at Notion and unusual for its date in that it has curvilinear rather than rectilinear seating inside the auditorium. And I'll return to that point at the end of the talk. So that's in Athens. I'm going to show you now the Bouleuterion at Priene, which is, I can't see this map very clearly, I'm sorry, but it's down here in the Meander River Valley, south of Notion. Here's a view of the site taken from the hill that overlooks the site. This is the agora of Priene, and the Bouleuterion is this building here. So it occupies a position similar to that of the Bouleuterion at Notion. Here's a view of it. It's a much better preserved building because it was more deeply buried. So here you see those rectangular seats, or rectilinear, that rectilinear seating arrangement. This is the place that I am calling the orchestra. This is an altar, and basically speakers would stand, behind the altar, swear an oath on the altar to speak the truth, and then address their fellow counselors. Here is a plan of that building, and I think you can see the generic similarity with the plan of the Bouleuterion at Notion. Here is a view looking straight on at the building with a reconstruction drawing to give you some sense of what how its interior was configured. Crucial to our understanding of the architecture of these buildings is the roofing system. Buildings this size could not have been roofed without the development of the triangular truss as a way of distributing the weight of a roof over the walls of the structure that supports the roof. And the truss doesn't come into Greek architecture until the Hellenistic period. So famous temples like the Parthenon were built without this technology. It was this technology that made it possible to build large assembly buildings like this as a common part of the architecture of a city. So that's one of the reasons why the Bouleuterion doesn't, although its roots are traced back to the 5th century, it doesn't become a common building type until the Hellenistic period. Okay, let's go back to the Bouleuterion at Notion now. So the first thing we did is just make that basic plan of the building that I showed you before. The next thing we did was try from study of the building to understand how it was designed and how it stood up. And that means principally how it was roofed. So here's the basic state plan. So, the roof is essentially supported by the exterior walls, but then there are column bases around the back of the seats, between the seats and the ambulatory. And there are 2 big column bases here. And these all must have been crucial to the to the engineering of the roof structure. And we assume, this is the shorter dimension, we assume that there was a series of trusses that went from east to west across the shorter dimension. So that the building had a pitched roof sloping down to the front and rear entrances. I'll come back to that. Let's talk a little bit about the design. So this is a simplified version of the drawing that illustrated this lecture on the Kelsey website. And let me just explain what these circles represent to you. Each of these little circles is 16 attic ionic feet. That's a standard foot measure of 29.5 centimeters used in Hellenistic architecture. Each of these circles has a diameter of 16 feet. And what this diagram shows was that the building has very, very simple and straightforward proportions. So the auditorium is 32 feet in its north-south dimensions. The seats are 16 feet wide, and the ambulatory is another 16 feet wide. So the seats plus the ambulatory are equal in dimensions to the auditorium. So the whole building is based on a pretty simple unit of measurement, which is 16 feet. And the Greek foot was divided into 16 inches, which were called dactyls. So this division or multiplication by units of 16 was quite common in Greek measurement. So the geometry of the building is very simple. The dimensions of the building are very straightforward. It was easy to design and easy to construct. The whole building can be designed with a straight line and a compass, and it can be laid out on the ground with the equivalents. So, a cord that can be used as a straight line, and a chain, like the chains you use in measuring first downs in football games, a chain that can be used to rotate around a point and make a circle. I think it's just fascinating to understand how Greek architects operated in this way. So that's one thing that we learned from study of the building, was how it was laid out. And then we learned, or we think, how it was built and how it stood up. And so this is a cross section of the building that shows you one of these trusses and the support system for the trusses. So let me finish by coming back to the point I raised earlier, which is, why do we have a rectilinear rather than a curvilinear system of for the layout of the seats here? And I'm going to show you another curvilinear Bouleuterion. That's at the site of Miletus, which is down here near Priene. Here's an aerial view of that site. And here's a restored view that shows the location of the Bouleuterion, which is this structure here, which had a simple pitched roof sloping toward the front and back as we reconstruct for the Bouleuterion at Nubuterion. A closer up view of it, a view of the actual remains on the right, and a restored plan on the left. And here's the plan with a restoration of the interior. So there are some obvious advantages in having curvilinear seating. You don't have anyone stuck in the awkward corner that you have in rectilinear seating. So everybody is looking, along the radius of a circle at the person standing in the center here. So, and of course, the Greeks were familiar with this kind of auditorium construction from open air Greek theaters. So why didn't they? Why wasn't this kind of construction more common in Greek Bouleuteria, and why wasn't it employed in the Bouleuterion at Nubuterion? And there are some disadvantages to buildings like this, like the sort of lost space that you have in the, whoops, sorry about that, the lost space that you have in the corners of the building. I'll just leave that. And of course, you could get around that by inscribing the semicircular back of the building in its outline. So have a building that was semicircular on the outside. And that does eventually become the norm, but it doesn't fit as naturally into a grid plan town as a rectilinear building fits. I'm just going to cut to the chase here and say that I think that the main reason why the designers and builders of the Bouleuterion at Notion didn't use this kind of seating was because it is harder to roof and it requires either more in the way of internal supports or broader trusses. And trusses depend on having long timbers. And long timbers were extremely rare and expensive in ancient building, in ancient Greek building. So if you take a building like the Parthenon, the most expensive single element of that building is the ridgepole of the roof. The stone is cheap. The timbers have to be imported from far away, from Lebanon, for example. The cedars of Lebanon were famous in antiquity as they are today, as especially tall and long trees that could do things like be the masts of ships and the ridgepoles of roofs and the cross beams of big trusses, but they were hugely expensive. So probably a reason for going with the more traditional rectilinear layout of the seats rather than the curvilinear layout of the seats had to do with the expense and the availability of this very costly building material. So those are some of the issues that interest us in the study of buildings like this: how they were designed, how they were built, and we feel that answering those questions is an important beginning to understanding how they were perceived, what kind of cultural meaning they had in the context of cities inhabited by people who built and used these buildings. Okay, I have no idea how long I've been talking. It's probably more than 15 minutes, but I'm going to stop now and take questions. Are there any questions? I can't hear any questions, so if you, I'm not sure exactly how to handle the questions, but I'm hoping people can just speak up. Marina's iPad, can you say something just so I can know whether or not I can hear people?
Right, thank you. I was about to do that. I don't have any questions, but I found this quite fascinating. I've seen a lot of open air theaters in the Middle East, but I didn't know that some of them had roofs. Yeah, well,
theaters, with much larger seating capacities, were always open air. The Bouleuterion was, in a traditional Greek city, the single largest covered building. And it was a multifunctional building. Its primary significance semantically was to serve as the meeting place for the town council. But it would have been the place where you would have had musical performances, recitations of lyric poetry, speeches by visiting intellectuals, all the kinds of things that didn't appeal to as large audiences as theaters, and that required a more controlled environment. And of course, that could also provide shelter from the elements, especially in wintertime. So these were really important buildings in Greek cities, and they were used for many other purposes besides meetings of the town council.
Thank you. I like the part with the circles too. That's a great way to build. That's a nice, simple way to build something.
Chris, this is Suzanne. I have my video off. I apologize for that. I'm in my kitchen and it's not conducive to having my video on. But I have a question about the ambulatory around the Bouleuterion. Could you talk about like its function in town life? Would it have been a place that people would come and hang out, or was it more like reserved for, you know, for council officials? Like, could you just talk about what it would have been like in the town?
Well, it's an interesting question. I mean, could anybody just walk in and you know, and get in, you know, sit in the Bouleuterion when it wasn't being used, and get out of the sun, and, you know, and visit with friends? I mean, I don't know, but I rather doubt it. I mean, I think that the building was probably restricted to the members of the boulé, so the kind of civic aristocracy that belonged to this effectively hereditary body of councillors who, you know, who managed the affairs of the city. So the boulé of a Greek city was a little bit like the Senate of Rome. It was an aristocratic body. That said, I think that the ambulatory is a particularly interesting space. It obviously provided standing room for meetings of the town council, or for the other kinds of public events that would have taken place in these kinds of buildings. But it's a pretty spacious, you know, it's 16 feet wide. It's a pretty spacious area, and I imagine it could have been used for other kinds of meetings that people could have set up in the Bouleuterion. This could have been the place where, for example, public officials like, you know, tax collectors and so on would have done public business. It's the place, one imagines, where certain kinds of elevated commercial transactions like money changing, which is basically banking activity, could have taken place. I could imagine that people could have could use it for small dining parties, you know, small banquets. So absolutely, I think the ambulatory is an interesting part of the building that gives us a way of thinking about the other functions besides public assemblies that could have taken place in these buildings. Does that answer your question partly?
Yes, thank you. It's so big. Yeah, it's interesting. Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
And I also want to say to other folks who are attending the talk, if you have questions, I can see the chat, and you're welcome to put your questions into the chat, and I can read them out loud to Chris if you like.
Thank you, Suzanne. Yeah, I'm showing, I mean, all kinds of technical incompetence today, and and one of them is that I'm just not used to using a PC, and so even something as simple as like PowerPoint and Zoom is it's
understood. Yeah, happens to all of us.
For those of you who don't know, Suzanne Davis, who's the head conservator at the Kelsey, is also a member of the field staff at Nubuterion and has accompanied us to the site in Turkey in field seasons, and is collaborating on the publication of the results of the survey.
I'm not seeing any questions coming into the chat. So
I will admit to all of you that I was so pleased with myself when I came up with all these circles. You know, when I sort of cracked the code, as it were, of the design of this building, which, as you can see, isn't very complex. It's really, you know, quite transparent, but it's just so satisfying to get that kind of insight into the, you know, into into the mind of the person or the people responsible for making this building. What we as archaeologists so often do is simply describe what we see, and when we get this kind of insight into the thought of the people who designed the buildings that we study as ruins, it's very satisfying.
Thanks, Chris. We have one comment from Julia, who says this is really fascinating.
Julia.
But I think otherwise we have some folks saying thanks now. And so I think we can probably call it for today. We're at 10 minutes to 1. So that's probably a good time for us to sign off. You're getting lots of thank you messages now in the chat.
Well, thank you, Suzanne, for the technical assistance. Apologies to all of you for the delay in getting started, but thanks for coming. And you can easily find your way. You all know your way around the Kelsey website. Otherwise, you wouldn't know about this talk. You can easily find your way to the website via the Kelsey website. You can find your way to the page about Nubuterion. So if you want to find out more about the site, I encourage you to do that. So thanks again for coming.
Thanks, everybody. I'm going to sign off now. Bye.
Okay.
This was great. I really enjoyed it.
Bye-bye.